Have you ever wanted to make a patchwork quilt? It's really very easy once someone shows you how. So let's start at the beginning and look at it. This is how you make a quilt. It's 3 layers of fabric, a top, a batting, and a backing, and they're sandwiched together and held together with little tiny quilting stitches. And quilt patterns have names, and that's how we can identify them. This is a Lone Star quilt. It's made up of 45-degree diamonds that are pieced together to form an 8-pointed star. It's really a beautiful quilt, isn't it? And a very descriptive name, Lone Star. We also have here a Trip Around the World quilt. This one is a baby quilt. It's made of primary colors. It starts in the center with red and goes to orange and yellow. You can see how the colors radiate out from each other and form a pattern the colors encircle each other, forming that Trip Around the World pattern. A Trip Around the World variation is Sunshine and Shadow. Here it is starts with darks in the center and goes to lights and back out to darks again. The squares are straight up and down, as opposed to the diamonds that there were in the baby quilt. And this particular pattern is very intriguing to look at because it's very visual. The lights and darks hit your eye. Very exciting to look at. Another variation is the many trips around the world. Instead of there being one central square, there are 5 central squares, and so the pattern becomes even that much more intricate. This particular piece is a tablecloth, but you could also make a pillow or a tote bag or a lap throw. The possibilities are endless, and that's really why I like the Trip Around the World pattern. It's very easy to construct once someone shows you how, and the possibilities are endless. And that's what we're going to do in this series. We're going to teach you how to make this quilt, the Trip Around the World quilt. So you're going to need to get some supplies. You're going to need some fabric, some plastic template material, a sharp pencil, scissors that are meant for fabric, thread, and the availability of a sewing machine. And once you get that together, we're ready to go on and select the colors. In patchwork quilting, the selection of colors is a key step. The successful combining and selecting of colors is what enables each of us to be artistic and creative and to really enjoy our quilt making. Even in the old days, when women used to use scraps of clothing to make quilts when they couldn't afford to buy yardage, they would be very careful to combine and select colors to make a very pleasing design. And that's what we're going to think about in our Trip Around the World quilt. Here's our baby Trip Around the World quilt. If you look at it, the colors contrast sharply with each other. It goes from red to orange to yellow. It's very clear and easy to see. And also the colors follow the color spectrum. It makes a very pleasing design visually, and it has a lot of contrast. I have another quilt to show you. This is a very nice Trip Around the World. And here it shows the contrast again very clearly. It goes from light to mediums and then darks. You can see how the contrasts really make a sharp differentiation. You can really see it with your eyes. And notice it doesn't matter what colors you use. You can use whatever color you like, red, blue. This is green and brown. But what is important is the contrast of lights and darks. I have some fabric swatches that could be used for a Trip Around the World quilt. But something's missing here. Can you see it? The reds are all just about the same, and so we're going to need to add something else. Here's a light red. I think if I take this one out, because it is redundant, and put this one in, see the difference? It's very nice, light, medium, dark, and reds. Now I need to do the same thing in the greens. I have this dark green. I'll take this out. But wait, here's even a better suggestion. You notice how these two fabrics are the same. They're just opposites of each other. It will be more interesting if we use yet another print and another scale of print. And now we have a very good selection for the Trip Around the World quilt. Now it's time to plan our trip around the world quilt. The finished size of the patchwork will be 42 inches by 52 inches, and each block finished will be 2.5 inches. And we will need 6 fabrics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll need 5/8 of a yard of each fabric. I chose the colors that I wanted to match my family room, and you'll have to think about what decor you want to match or who you're giving it to, what colors they would like their trip around the world quilt to be made in. So here are my fabric colors, and now I have to decide how to arrange them. We'll start with the lightest one, and then the next, and this is red, so we'll use a medium red for the third one. And then we'll make the transition from red to blue with this. This is a beautiful fabric, isn't it? And a dark blue this way. All right, now you can decide which one will be your center square. You can start with a light fabric and go from light to dark. So we could go like this. Or you can start with a dark fabric and go back to the lights. I really like this fabric the best. I really like the scale of the print, so I think I'll use it as my center square and work out from there. Fabric 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. A great selection. Quilt making represents a large investment of time and energy, so you would like to choose your materials wisely. There's really nothing like 100% cotton broadcloth. It has a wonderful feel, and the softness of it increases as the quilt ages. The weight of 100% broadcloth is also just perfect for quilt making. Eventually you'll be taking 2 layers of fabric and a batting and quilting them together. And if you use anything heavier than cotton, you'll be sorry because your fingers will be very sore and pretty soon you're going to want to quit. So once you've selected your cotton fabrics, you need to get them ready for quilt making. And what you have to do is pre-shrink each fabric. Take each fabric separately, rinse it out in hot water, and throw it in the dryer. We do them separately because often the colors can bleed or run into the water, and you don't want them to run onto the other fabrics. If you get a fabric that is bleeding and running a lot, you can try to put 1/4 cup of vinegar in the tub of cold water and let that soak for 2 or 3 hours. Then remember, keep rinsing the fabric until there's no more color running out of it. Once you've done that and you know that all the colors are set and the fabrics have been pre-shrunk, you need to press them, and then you're ready to start cutting your quilt. In dressmaking, we use patterns. In quilt making, we use a template. This is a traditional template. It'll give us a 2.5-inch finished square, a 3-inch cut square. We would use this template to make this quilt. You can see these are 2.5-inch finished squares. If you use this template to cut out each of these squares individually, you could cut this quilt in about a day. But I have a much better way, and that is using a multiple template. It's made out of clear plastic acetate. And what it is a series of 3-inch squares, all cut at the same time. And we'll mark them with a 1/16 of an inch slit. And that's eventually where the fabric will be cut into squares. If you use this template, you can cut this quilt in about an hour. While piecing patchwork, accurate marking and cutting is absolutely essential. In this trip around the world quilt, you're going to need your plastic multiple template, a very good pair of fabric scissors, and a water-soluble marking pencil. I've arranged my fabrics one on top of the other, with the darkest one, and then they get lighter as we go. And that's just so it'll be easy to see the pencil markings. Take your template, start at one end, and don't go all the way to the selvage, because you might miss some of the fabrics from the underneath part, and mark the outside edge of the template and each of the snips. Come down and continue doing the markings. This one, mark all the way to the edge. Don't leave any space between any of the template markings, either in the rows or the rows going this way. You're going to need to make 5 rows altogether, and then you're ready to cut. You want to be careful not to move the fabric while you're cutting, because the fabric could slip and then you would have inaccurate strips cut. So first I would cut this off, then I would be cutting across the top. You will continue all the way down the top. Then you will be cutting in between row 1 and row 2. And notice how neat this is, because you're cutting between 2 rows at the same time. When you're finished cutting down the whole length of the row, then you'll be making your snips. Cut through all 6 layers of fabric, cut into the fabric 1/4 inch. Do the snips on this side. When you finish doing all of your cutting, arrange your fabrics by color. We've cut our strips, we're ready to make our quilt. We're going to make 2 chevron-shaped sections like this one, and each of them represents 1/2 of our quilt. And later on we'll be making a single strip to connect the 2 halves together. What you will do is start with a 1 unit of color number 2, and you will be piecing it to a 3 unit of color number 3. Be sure to match up the slits and use 1/4 inch seams. Then you will take a 5 unit of the next color, which in this case is 2-3 color number 4. Sew them together. We're going to continue in this manner, adding each next color and adding 1 block to the outside each time. So you'll go from 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so forth, following color 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. Sometimes you'll find that you don't have enough of one strip of fabric. It isn't long enough, so all you will do is butt up the next piece, and it really doesn't matter, because eventually we're going to be cutting through that anyway. This is a diagram of the chevron that we're making. You'll recognize that this is the 1 unit of fabric number 2, this is the 3 unit of fabric number 3, the 5 unit of fabric number 4, that's what I just sewed before. And you will continue on in this manner, following your color order sequence and following the diagram. When you get out to fabric number 4, that's your longest single unit, and then it comes straight down from there. And you'll notice also at the same time it starts to come out from the middle and gets smaller from the middle out. Follow the diagram and you really won't have a problem. When you're finished making the chevrons, you're going to have to press the seams. In patchwork we always press to one side, and I want you to alternate the sewing directions of the pressing. So this one will go to the right, this one will go to the left, right, left, right, left, and so on down. What you'll find is when we go to re-sew the patches, it'll make a big difference if you pressed it like this. Now we've sewed our chevrons together and we've pressed the seams in alternate directions, and now I'm going to show you how to cut it for re-sewing. Turn your chevron to the wrong side, take your fabric scissors And you're going to cut following your snips. Cut all the way through and all the way to the end. And you want to be careful to keep these in order as you're cutting them so you don't get mixed up. Now I'm going to show you what happens. I have one here that's already cut, and I want you to see how they realign, how they're all the same size, and how the colors blocks are one off from another. Can you get that? I'll do one more for you so you really can see what's happening here. Pretty exciting, huh? Okay, I want to show you one more thing now, and that is how important the pressing was. When you look at the seams, if they were pressed right, they will just butt up right to each other, and you'll be able to sew them and match your seams without using any pins at all. We finished cutting and reassembling the chevron section, and now we have a half of a quilt top, which looks like this. Now to connect the two halves, we need to do one center strip that's different from everything else, so we'll have to do it independently. This is what it looks like when it's finished. It will start out with fabric number 1 in the center. Then you'll need 2 pieces of fabric number 2. You're going to work out from both sides. Fabric number 3, and just continue out like that till you get through to fabric number 3 for a second time. Sew them together. Then you will attach it to one half of the quilt. Then you'll put the other half of the quilt onto this seam, and then you will have a finished patchwork top of a trip around the world quilt. Now we've finished our patchwork top, and we have to add borders to it. We're going to add a 4-inch border, and the finished size of our quilt will be 50 inches by 60 inches. It's very important to measure out your borders ahead of time. This is your chance to square off the quilt and make sure all the edges are even. So you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric that are 4.5 inches by 50.5 inches, and 2 pieces of fabric that are 4.5 inches by 60.5 inches. You're going to center them and sew them onto the quilt. Then to finish the edges, you can either just sew straight up like this and square it off, or I really prefer mitering. In either case, finish doing all of your sewing and press your top. This is the last time you'll be able to do it. Once you mark a top, you can no longer press it. Now you're going to pick the stencil of your choice. I picked a cable design and a water-soluble marking pencil. Please never use lead pencil or pen. It might not come out of your quilt top, and then you would ruin the whole thing. Carefully center it on the corner and just mark through each of the slits. You'll have to keep sharpening your pencil as you go, and mark all the lines that you want throughout the whole entire top. We finished our patchwork top, and now we just have a couple more decisions to make before we're ready to start quilting. And the first decision is what kind of batting you want to use. The most commonly used batting is polyester batting. It needs to be quilted every 4 inches or less, and it's pretty easy to work with and get a needle through. And it comes in sizes. The first size is 45 by 60 for a crib quilt, 72 by 90 for a twin size, etc. and so forth. So you can pick the batting size that you need. Another kind of batting is 100% cotton batting. It's what was used in colonial times and before they had polyester. It's nice to work with, but it's difficult because you have to quilt every 2 inches or less. And that means you have to do an awful lot of quilting to finish your quilt. The third kind of batting is wool. It's very warm, and that's why you might consider using it, but it's very difficult to get a needle through. So I suggest that you use the polyester. If you really want cotton, there's a new product on the market which is a blend. It's 80% cotton and 20% polyester, so that might satisfy your need for cotton. Whichever, get the batting ready and then choose a backing that complements your quilt top. The backing needs to be 2 inches bigger than the quilt top all the way around. So since our quilt is 50 inches by 60 inches, the backing will have to be 54 inches by 64 inches. Get that all together and we're ready to learn how to baste our quilt top for quilting. This strip around the world quilt top is ready to be quilted, and we're going to baste it to prepare it for quilting. You will need a large flat area to do that, and I usually use my dining room floor. Move the dining room table. Take the backing and lay it wrong side up, flat, and you can tack it down with masking tape. Take the batting, I'm using polyester here, and center it over the backing, and take the top and center it over the backing and the batting. Smooth it out, make sure it's free of wrinkles. Use a contrasting thread, and you do your basting from the center out. You have to go to each side, and then you'll come back to the center and go to each corner. Just real big stitches. It's just to hold it in place until the quilting's completed. And I don't even knot it here at the end. I just usually take a double stitch. You'll continue center out to corners. And the finished product will look like this. It will hold the quilt top in place until you're ready to quilt it. We finished basting our quilt and we're finally ready to start quilting. You don't need a large frame to quilt a quilt. Today there are many sizes and varieties of hoops available. Just pick one that you feel comfortable with. It's portable and you can carry it with you. It's really a lot easier and better to use. I'm going to use a 14-inch hoop for my quilt. Center it on the quilt and check the back and make sure that there are no puckers or folds in the backing. Tighten up the screw, and you're ready to start quilting. Quilting is a running stitch that, in this case, I'll move the needle, is going to be 1/4 of an inch inside the seam, each seam. Now let's look at some examples of quilting patterns. For me, this is the most relaxing and enjoyable part of making a quilt. Watch closely, I'm going to show you how to do the quilting stitch. Use a between needle, it's shorter than a regular embroidery needle, and quilting thread. It has a special silicone finish to keep the thread from knotting. First, what we have to do is pop the knot. Take your needle and bring it up where you want to start quilting, and pull away the backing till you hear the knot pop through. That way it won't be showing on the back at all. And now we're going to do a running stitch. Feel the needle come underneath to your underneath finger and see it coming up. Try to make the stitch length and the space equal. And don't worry, your stitches will start out big, but they'll get smaller as you get more comfortable with the quilting. When you've done as much as you can do with the thread, it's getting too short, you need to cut it off, you have to end the thread. To do that, go straight down through the backing, come back up right at the beginning of the stitch, and I try to split the thread if I can. Make another knot, and now we'll pop that knot through to the batting just like we did to start the stitch. Cut off the thread. No knots are showing, and you've completed a quilting stitch. When you're finished quilting your quilt, you're ready to bind it. Trim off the batting and the backing so that it's equal with the quilt top. And then you have to pick your binding. You can either purchase it in the store or make your own. Just choose a color that complements the quilt. If you're going to make your own, cut the strips 1.5 inches wide. Take the binding and sew it by machine to the wrong side of the quilt, 1/4 inch seam. Fold the binding over, turn in the raw edge, and slip stitch along the fold. When you're finished doing this row of stitching, you've completed the quilt. Please sign and date your quilt. It's a work of art to be appreciated for years.
This is the City Quilt Shop in the heart of Oakland's Arts and University area at 311 South Craig Street. The City Quilt Shop offers everything a quilter needs. Over 500 bolts of 100% cotton in prints and solids, bats, hoops, stencils, templates, books, and all the help you'll ever need with your quilting. You can buy or custom order quilts, wall hangings, and unique quilted gifts, or attend classes designed for every level of quilting. The City Quilt Shop, open till 5:30 every day and till 9 on Wednesday and Thursday.